Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, there's also a newsletter that comes out on Wednesdays and Fridays. You can subscribe on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Before we get into our guest interview, let's get into some headlines. Netherlands-based Newcold, which designs, owns, and operates automated warehouses that food giants like ConAgra and McCain Foods use for their cold storage supply chains, relocated its Chicago office to 500 West Madison in 2021. It's since grown there to around 75 on-site employees, which is expected to grow to over 200 over the next 2 years. Chicago was chosen as the home for the city's large pool of technology-savvy talent, and they are skilled in logistics as well as the city's large base of food business. International Food Solutions, a Florida-based company with Cleveland ties, plans on redeveloping a vacant building on the corner of East 55th Street and Central Avenue. The building used to be occupied by Goodwill Industries of Greater Cleveland. International Food Solutions, a company that sells pre-made meals to school cafeterias, is planning on opening a new poultry processing plant in Cleveland and has won a $9.6 million grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The global food and beverage cold chain logistics market is forecasted to grow over $8 million during 2022 to 2027. According to a study by Infinity Research Limited, this study identifies the use of fuel cell-based forklifts in refrigerated warehousing to increase productivity and save space as one of the prime reasons driving the food and beverage cold chain logistics market growth during the next few years. Also, the rising popularity of blockchain technology to improve traceability in cold chains and the use of IoT with cold chain logistics will lead to a sizable demand in the market. Today, we are joined by Todd Ziegler, founder and CEO of TruckCoinSwap. Welcome to Running on Ice, Todd.
Thanks for having me on, Mary.
So we're kind of going in a little different direction today. We're kind of going more towards the freight factoring and everything like that. It's a problem that everybody's kind of having. So I like to call you an expert here to talk about it. Why don't you give us a brief rundown of your background and then just kind of how TruckCoinSwap got started?
Yeah, happy to do that. It's an exciting time because the blockchain is formally meeting the supply chain. But in terms of my background, I'm a recovering lawyer by education. And I've been working, prior to founding TruckCoinSwap, I'd been working in the 3PL sector in full truckload for about a decade, primarily in roles where I was working with Fortune companies, helping them source capacity, work through procurement events, etc. And that's when I first learned about this trade finance problem, this systemic trade finance problem that we have in the transportation industry. And that's ultimately what led to the creation of TruckCoinSwap.
Okay, I like it. And that's, it's generally like factoring is a nightmare for everybody. And I think I've learned that, it's a good freight factoring company if somebody says they're not that bad. They're not that bad. And like, if that's like the sign of approval, I think we have a problem. So invoice settlement is pretty much, as someone that was a former auditor of invoices, it's a nightmare. It's one of the worst problems in freight. Why do you think it's such a massive issue for everyone just to pay a carrier to do a service for them?
Yeah, well, so the primary issues are both around costs and time, right? So the best way I think to frame the issues are we have these two silent taxes in the supply chain in the United States. One of them is directly correlated with invoice factoring, and the other one is correlated with inflation. And right now we've got about 1 million or perhaps over 1 million US trucking companies that are factoring 100% of their invoices, and about 60% of third-party logistics companies are also now factoring 100% of their invoices. Trucking companies are typically paying 3 to 4% of gross on every receivable. Sometimes that doesn't sound that bad, but when you do the math, these are 25 to 35% annualized interest rates. And oftentimes, because trucking companies are working on pretty narrow margins, especially in soft markets like the one that we're in right now, oftentimes they're losing up to 90% of their net revenue dealing with those interest rates and those costs. 3PLs are also kind of getting raked too. Typically for 3PLs, they're paying 1% of gross in a factoring agreement. 1% also doesn't sound that bad, but you have to break down the math. So if it's a $10,000 freight invoice and the commission to the 3PL is $300, but for example, the net revenue on that transaction to the 3PL is only about $200. You've got, 33% of the total gross costs and 50% of the net revenue getting eaten up by those factoring costs. And ultimately, what this does is it requires an increase in freight rates to be able to support all of these additional costs and charges. And ultimately, that makes the cost of goods more expensive, not just for transportation companies, but also for consumers and households. And I think in the November election, the cost of goods and inflation was the number one issue on the ballot. So not only is this a major problem in our industry right now, but it's arguably becoming a national security crisis if inflation rates continue to kick up.
I mean, it's one of those where it's like, it's one thing. I think everyone has kind of just started seeing how much the supply chain impacts everybody, because for the most part, if you were to talk to anybody, like if I were to walk into a bar, no one would be talking about supply chain availability or like things missing or things being out of stock, aside from like, I don't know, maybe like the new Air Jordans or something, if people still line up outside of Foot Locker for that. But the thing I think that it kind of shocked me is I would walk in and people be like, oh yeah, like now there's a shortage of this, now there's a shortage of that. And I'm like, when did other people start caring about this? And suddenly anyone at a bar stool was a supply chain expert and they would tell me everything that was wrong with transportation. And I was like, I love where your head's at, but no. And so that's where you could kind of look at them and go like, do you actually want the answer? Or do you just want to speculate that there's no blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's interesting that now the supply chain world's in the position where, everyone has to, like, everyone knows about it. All eyes are on it. When in the past, you didn't really hear about your supply chain unless something was broken. But now so many things have been stressed and broken and demand, like we keep hitting weird demand cycles. So it's just one of those where it's like, all of a sudden everybody cares and they're seeing how when things are affected throughout the supply chain, it ends up being more expensive for everybody. So it's kind of I want to say a win-win, but it's more of like a lose-lose, because like it's a win that more people are learning about it and educating themselves about logistics and supply chain and everything like that. But also like it's a lose-lose because shippers are losing money from different outages or lost sales. Carriers are losing money because the freight rates aren't as high. It's just kind of like I don't know. It's just not great.
Yeah, and most people are in the industry are familiar with this statistic that 90% of the full truckload spot freight that moves in our country every day is moving on the backs of 1 million small trucking companies. And there's that famous quote, I think it was like a French philosopher or something that said that even established economies and established countries are only 3 days away from anarchy, right? If people can't get to grocery stores and buy food. And I think we all got a little bit of a taste of that during COVID, walking into stores and seeing shelves empty. And then we got another taste of it last year during the baby formula shortage. So yeah, the supply chain is important. Everybody's attention is on it now, and we're working to help reduce costs to the benefit of everybody involved.
So speaking of those reducing costs, TruckCoinSwap just made history by settling the first freight freight or settling the first freight invoice on the blockchain. What can you guys tell us about that first transaction?
Yeah, we did, and we made blockchain and Web3 history doing that. I think the press release went out about 3 weeks ago, and Governor Gordon from Wyoming was nice enough to throw us a quote for the press release because we're a Wyoming company that's based right outside of the University of Wyoming. But that transaction was with one of TruckCoinSwap's customers. It's a carrier by the name of Bulldog Industrial, based in New Jersey. And the owner of that company, Vinny, he was definitely not native to cryptocurrency or blockchain or digital assets. But he was able to manage the transaction in a matter of a couple minutes. He was able to basically take his freight invoice, upload it into our proprietary mobile and web app, and he got his cash in about 3 days. And he
That
was,
is insane. That is an
yeah, and
insane turnaround.
most importantly, the Truck Coin Swap settlement platform is free. We didn't charge Vinny anything for the service because we don't need to. And the exchange that we transacted on, I think, had a fee of $1.10. So to put that in context, if that was a $10,000 invoice at the normal 3 to 4% charge with a factoring company, that transaction would have cost Vinny $300 to $400, and he probably wouldn't have gotten his cash for about 10 business days. Doing that same transaction with TruckCoinSwap, he could do it for about $10, get his cash in about 3 business days, and then be able to move on to the next transaction. So, or get the next load, right? So it is an infinitely superior payment platform than what we have right now. Invoice factoring has kind of been a necessary evil in the industry for decades because there simply was not any other alternative. If you're on shipper pay terms that aren't good, 30 to 180 days, invoice factoring is the only way to get your money in 10 days. Until we created a solution using blockchain and Web3 tech. So it's a really exciting time watching both of these industries converge around the solution that's been created in freight invoice settlement.
I think that ideally, the root solution would just be to have shippers that don't have 180-day invoice payment options. But I think that the whole world might freeze before that happens because I know quite a few shippers that operate on that. And that's great if you're a mega carrier that does billions of dollars, you can float that. But if you're John's Trucking, where every dollar does matter, if I can save almost $200 off of one transaction alone, like that's some massive cost savings that I could potentially change the entire course of my business, make me be more successful, and potentially even like buy another truck and have two trucks instead of one. Anything like that all those, like, that seems like a lot, but it's just like the little steps that you take to just be a little bit better every day.
Well, it's funny you made that point because Vinny, the owner of Bulldog Trucking, they're a 2 truck operation in New Jersey, and he crunched the numbers and figured out that using the Truck Coin Swap platform, he could probably save about $40,000 a year in net revenue, about $20,000 per truck. It's a little bit lower because his trucks are doing short run; they're not long haul operations. And that's exactly what he said. He said, if we were able to recapture 40,000 in net revenue in 2023, we could buy another truck, we could get another driver, we could grow our business by 33%. So it's pretty exciting to watch all of those things happen in real time.
That's pretty game changing because not that just because there's so many carriers and drivers out there that are so hesitant to accept and adapt new technology. So I think the fact that you guys have really lowered those barriers for them just to get involved, like yeah, they might have to download another app, but they're not getting charged a monthly maintenance fee. They don't, it doesn't come with like $1,000 a year subscription. Like it's just something nice and easy that it's literally just like, just try it. What's the worst that could happen? You get paid faster and you get paid more.
Yeah, the apps are free. The platform is free, and they also don't have to sign, some egregious 30-page draconian, factoring agreement just to be able to access the service, right? It's all pretty straightforward.
I kind of like that, but the biggest thing I guess is like, why does this solution matter so much to truckers, carriers, and 3PLs in the temperature controlled sector? Like, I know we talked on it. If one carrier can save $40,000 a year, if and that's a pretty small carrier, is it just because that sheer cost savings that could then in turn, propel a business forward? Is that the real like motivation behind this, and the real keys to that success?
It really is. The cost savings is the value proposition, and ultimately, as a company at TruckCoinSwap, we also hope that in the aggregate, the more companies that adopt, maybe we can actually put a little bit of downward pressure on freight rates, right? Because the trucking companies don't need much higher rates to be able to operate at something that resembles profitability. And that would have a really fantastic impact on, putting some downward pressure on inflation when, goods make it to market for consumers and households. And one really important thing too about the platform is, because a lot of people, you hear blockchain, Web3, it sounds complex. Our model is identical to what the factoring companies are doing now. We have our own proprietary mobile and web app. You deliver a load, you take a picture of your POD, you upload it, and that starts the process. The only difference with our platform is we've added one step at the end, and that step takes about 2 to 3 minutes. And anybody can, Vinny, like I said, was not in any way crypto native, and he was able to work through it with no problem on the first transaction. And another important point here is the entire business and revenue model for the platform is helping transportation companies if they're cold chain or not, 3PLs if they're moving reefer freight or not. It's helping them get to liquidity at the lowest cost in the fastest amount of time. So while we're settling them in a digital asset, a Polygon token, they're only holding that token for about 2 to 3 minutes. And we've built it that way because we didn't want anybody in the freight industry, in the transportation industry, to be subjected to crypto volatility. So we understand these folks are not digital asset investors. They're not engaged in arbitrage or anything like that. They just want to get back to US dollars as quickly as possible at the lowest price possible. So that's how we've built the platform.
Okay, I like that because I mean, that was going to be my next question is how do you kind of prevent that volatility? But if they're really only holding on to it for a couple minutes, there's not a lot of potential loss that could happen there. I mean, I know that the crypto markets do vary day to day, week to week, but minute to minute is not usually that aggressive of a change, you know?
Right. And an interesting thing is too, a lot of crypto exchanges already have crypto debit cards on the market. For example, Coinbase has one. We expect at some point this year we're going to see these exchanges come out with crypto fuel cards, where if you're holding Bitcoin or Ethereum or TCS token, you could literally go to a truck stop and spend digital assets directly off that card that's linked to your business wallet. So if we see that happen, that last step in the process will actually be eliminated. So that's another way that we can avoid any volatility. And I'll just add too, the figure that it's coming out of Washington right now is that the country is dealing with something like 12% annualized inflation. Um, Most economists and experts think that the number is much higher than that, but even at 12%, that's 1% a month. So just like we wouldn't suggest transportation companies, drivers, 3PL sit in any digital assets, I mean, we also wouldn't suggest that they sit in US dollars for too long. It's just not a good idea when there's volatility in currencies and volatility in these digital assets.
I mean, if someone found a way to just remove all volatility from all different forms of currency, that'd be great. But I don't think that's the world that we live in. But to those who are kind of skeptical, because I mean, we've brought up some of the typical like crypto talk, and anyone who's just like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. It's too complex. It's, it's just weird. We don't like it," or they're just like suspicious of it. What are kind of some of those thoughts that some of those skeptics might be able to work through, and kind of get some of that adoption to some of those that are hesitant?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to the value proposition a little bit. So if you're in long haul trucking and you're factoring, those costs are averaging about 30,000 per year in net revenue for every truck. Um, that is kind of an insane business model. Unfortunately, that's all we've had until now. So the value proposition is very much there for you. If you're not factoring your invoices because you're a company that's at scale, but you're waiting 60 days or more to get paid directly by shippers, then inflation costs are eroding the value of your invoices. If you're waiting 90 days to get paid, you're losing 3%. You're losing somewhere in the ballpark of 30,000 per year in net revenue on every truck. So the question in my mind isn't whether to adopt. The question for carriers is how long do they want to continue getting killed by factoring and inflation costs, especially in a soft market like this where the financial hardship is already very painful. We have this famous saying in the legal profession, right, that judges only want to hear from judges. I think it's the same in transportation where truckers want to hear from truckers. And when other truckers start talking about the savings and the cost benefit and the value proposition, we think we're going to see widespread adoption.
I mean, that would be great. I think we've seen it with some of the other applications that aren't necessarily related to this. We've seen it with other common fuel cards, is that if you get a couple of the truck influencers to adopt it, then it kind of trickles down. And pretty much it's like when you got to get into the club, you got to get like the sign off of like somebody to like get in. So like not the club, but like the super secret party, you got to get like on the list. So I like it. I think it's going to be great. I personally am for anything that's going to get people paid faster and make them be more profitable, because you should be paid for your services in a timely manner. You shouldn't have to fight for 30, 60, 90 days to try to just get paid for one shipment. You should be able to get paid pretty reasonably. Like, we don't wait 3 months for our paychecks, so why would we expect anyone else to do that? So I personally cannot wait to see what happens. I am all for the fuel card. I'm just excited to see if this can actually put pressure on some of the factoring companies as well to improve some of their terms as well, because they stand to lose a lot of money walking out the door if, they're not making that high percentage off each transaction anymore. So I think it's just going to be 2023 shaping up to be quite a spicy year. I'm pretty excited for it.
It should be exciting, and a lot of people who aren't familiar with crypto, they're reading the headlines and they're kind of hearing about the fraud and the nonsense. But the industry is supposed to be based on the underlying tech, right? Blockchain and Web3 technology. It's supposed to improve payment rails, make everybody's quality of life better. So this is the type of use case that the crypto industry needs to rally around. And I agree, it would be great to see more of these types of solutions, not just in the transportation industry, but in all industries. And I think we are going to start to see that.
I hope so. So we are almost out of time, and this is something new that we usually do on the show, Check Call, but we're bringing it to running on ice because it's fan favorite. And so that is, you have to answer a very important question. And is cereal a soup?
I would say it depends.
Okay.
Uh, there's maybe two key variables there, right? Is this cereal in milk? And if so, how long has the cereal been in milk? So maybe like the 4 minute mark.
Okay. All
I would
right.
say soup. Yeah.
I don't know that I really make my cereal sit for 4 minutes. Like, usually it's gone, but to each his own. Some people like some less crunchy cereal. I can't shame them for
Well, and
that.
sometimes it's like you pour the milk, you sit down, and your phone rings or something, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
coming back to soup. So
Yeah,
it's a
that's
problem.
fair.
I don't know if blockchain can solve it, but we'll work on it.
All right, I expect to have an answer by the end of the year of if blockchain can keep my cereal crispy as it sits in milk for a while.
Yeah, we'll run that up the flagpole at TruckCoinSwap.
So if anyone wants to contact you outside the show, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find us at truckcoinswap.com. We actually just launched our own podcast with a guy who runs a 7 truck fleet from a truck stop in New Jersey. He's our host. So all the content's there, all the information is there, and certainly we'd love carriers, 3PLs, anybody else who's interested to reach out to us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate it.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice on freightwaves.com, YouTube, or anywhere else you get your podcasts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.